He was sitting on the bench outside the Tim Hortons on Elgin Street, and I almost didn't recognize him. Not because he looked different, because I had never seen my son look small before. He is 6 feet tall and has his father's shoulders, and he has never once in 41 years asked me for anything he didn't absolutely need. But he was sitting there with his jacket zipped up against the October cold, and my grandson was asleep against his arm, and there were 2 green garbage bags on the ground at his feet. I pulled over. I put the car in park. I did not turn off the engine because it was cold and Liam was sleeping. I rolled down the window and I said, "Ethan, get in." He looked up and I saw it then. Not embarrassment, something worse. The face of a person who has just understood that they have nowhere left to go and is trying to decide if that is their fault. I got out of the car. I picked up both garbage bags and I put them in the trunk. I did not ask what was in them. I did not ask anything. I opened the back door and I put Liam's car seat in from the trunk. I keep a spare. I have kept one since he was born, and I buckled him in without waking him because I have been buckling children into car seats since 1983, and I know how to do it quietly. Ethan got in the passenger seat. He didn't say anything until we were on the Queensway. "She changed the locks," he said. "I know," I said. "I don't have anywhere to go." I smiled. Not because it was funny, because I knew something he didn't know yet. And the knowing of it was the only thing keeping me from pulling over and crying on the side of the highway. "Yes, you do," I said. "You had somewhere to go." He looked out the window. He said, "I don't want you to have to fix this." I said, "I'm not fixing anything. I'm just reminding you who you married." Let me back up. My son married his wife. I will call her his wife because that is still technically what she is 7 years ago. I will not pretend I had reservations at the beginning. I didn't. She was sharp and she was funny and she made him laugh in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. I liked her. I want to be honest about that because it matters for everything that came after. Her name is Christine. She grew up in Kanata. Her parents are retired. Her father did something in telecom. They are not bad people. That is the most complicated thing about this whole situation. They are not bad people who did a bad thing. They are people who wanted something and decided that wanting it badly enough was the same as being right. Ethan and Christine bought their house in Barrhaven 4 years ago. Ethan works in project management for a construction firm downtown. Christine works in marketing, or she did until about 18 months ago when she left her job to do something with social media consulting that I never fully understood but which seemed to be going well enough. I am a retired paralegal. I worked for 32 years at a family law firm on Metcalf Street. I retired 3 years ago and I spend my time now doing contract work on the side, keeping my certification current, taking care of my garden, and watching my grandson every Tuesday and Thursday. I tell you this not to be impressive. I tell you this because it is relevant. The house in Barrhaven. Here is what I knew about the house in Barrhaven that my son did not think to mention to me until very late in the story. The down payment was $65,000. My son had $40,000 saved. The remaining $25,000 came from Christine's parents. From her mother specifically. Her mother, Roberta, wrote a check for $25,000 in the spring of 4 years ago. And everyone at the time called it a gift. Everyone except, apparently, Roberta. The marriage had been struggling for about a year. Ethan told me this in pieces, the way children tell parents things. Slowly, in reverse order, the most important details last. They had been to counseling. They had stopped going to counseling. Christine had moved into the spare room sometime in August. Ethan said he still wanted to try. He said he was willing to do whatever it took. He said the most important thing was Liam. Liam was 3. Is 3. He is 3 years old and he has his father's eyes and he calls me Nan, and he is the reason I have kept a spare car seat in my trunk since he was born. In September, Christine told Ethan she wanted a separation. She said she had spoken to a lawyer. She said she wanted him out of the house by the end of the month. Ethan said he understood, that he wanted to do it properly, that he wanted to make sure Liam was okay through all of it. He came to me that weekend. We sat at my kitchen table in Nepean, and I made tea, and he told me all of it. He was calm. He was trying to be calm. He said, "I just want to know what my rights are." I said, "That's a good question. Let's talk about that." I asked him, "Whose name is on the title?" "Both of ours," he said. "Good," I said. I asked him, "Do you have the original mortgage documents?" He said he thought they were in the filing cabinet at home. I said, "You need to get those." He said he would. He didn't. 3 weeks later, he called me at 7 in the morning. He said she changed the locks while I was at work. I came home and my key doesn't work. She left my stuff in bags on the porch. I said, "Where are you now?" He said, "I'm in my car. I have Liam. He was at daycare and I picked him up before she could, and now I don't know what to do." I said, "Go to Tim Hortons, the one on Elgin. Get Liam a muffin. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He said, "I don't want you to have to." I said, "Ethan, Tim Hortons, 20 minutes. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for exactly 90 seconds. That is not a figure of speech. I looked at the clock on the microwave and I watched it, and I gave myself 90 seconds to feel everything I needed to feel. The anger, the protectiveness, the grief, even for a marriage I had hoped would last. Then I opened my laptop. Panic is not a strategy. In 32 years of family law, I watched panic cost people more than bad decisions did. Panic is what makes you sign things you shouldn't sign. Panic is what makes you say things in text that get read back to you 6 months later in a courtroom. Panic is the thing Roberta was counting on. I was not going to panic. In the car on the Queensway, I asked Ethan one question. I said, "Do you still have the paperwork from when Roberta gave you the $25,000? He said, "What paperwork?" I said, "The written agreement. The gift letter, something that says it was a gift." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I don't think there was anything in writing." I said, "Think carefully." He said, "It was just a check. Her mom gave us a check. She said she wanted to help with the house." I said, "And did she say anything else at the time? Was there any conversation about repayment, about conditions, about anything like that?" He thought. He said, "Not really, maybe once. When they came to see the house after we moved in, she made some comment about how it was partly hers too. But I thought she was just saying she was proud of it, like it was a family thing." I said, He looked at me. He said, "What does that mean?" "It means we have some work to do," I said. I should explain what Roberta had done, because it is important, and because I think a lot of people find themselves in situations like this without understanding what is actually happening. When Christine told Ethan she wanted him out of the house, she and Roberta had a plan. I don't know if the plan was made recently or if it had been forming for a long time. What I know is the shape of it. The shape of it was this. Roberta was going to claim that the $25,000 had not been a gift. It had been a loan, and because it had been a loan, and because the loan had not been repaid, she had a claim against the property. Her argument, and she did have a lawyer, a real one, not the fictional Patricia Chens of the world. A real man named Jeffrey who sent real letters on real letterhead. Her argument was that she had a beneficial interest in the property. That she was, in effect, a partial owner. That Ethan had no right to remain in the home while a financial dispute of this nature was ongoing. This is not how property law works in Ontario, but it sounds, if you say it confidently enough, like it might be. And Christine and Roberta had calculated, I think, that Ethan would not know the difference, that he would be confused and frightened and alone, and that he would agree to leave quietly, and then the separation would proceed with him already out of the house, already on the back foot, already without the leverage that comes from being the parent who is present. They had not calculated me. Ethan and Liam stayed with me that first night. I set up the pull-out in the spare room and I put Liam in my bedroom because the pull-out is harder than I'd like to admit, and 3-year-olds sleep through anything if they're tired enough. Ethan did not sleep. I know because I didn't sleep either. And at 2 in the morning, I heard him in the kitchen, and I came downstairs and we sat together, and I made us both tea, and we talked through everything I needed to know. I needed to know every asset. I needed to know every asset. I needed to know every debt. I needed to know about the mortgage, the balance, the payments, whether they were current. I needed to know about joint accounts, about Christine's income since she left her job, about any financial arrangements they had made since the separation began. He told me everything, slowly, over 2 cups of tea while the house was quiet and Liam was asleep above us. When he was done, I said, "Okay, this is manageable." He said, "It doesn't feel manageable." I said, "Most things don't when you're in the middle of them." He said, "What do I do?" I said, "First, you sleep. Then in the morning, I make some calls." The first call I made was to a family lawyer named Robert Chisholm, whose office is on Bank Street and who I had worked adjacent to for many years and who I trusted completely. I called him at 8 in the morning. He answered because lawyers who have known you for 30 years answer when you call at 8 in the morning. I explained the situation. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She changed the locks on a jointly owned property?" "Yes," I said. He said, "She cannot do that." "I know," I said. He said, "Even during a separation, even with a pending dispute." "I know," I said, "but Ethan needs to hear it from someone official, and we need to move quickly before she does anything else." Robert said, "Bring him in today." Ethan and Robert met that afternoon, while Liam and I went to the chapters on Rado and read picture books for 2 hours. This is my preferred method of waiting out difficult things. Liam picked out 4 books about trucks and one about a mouse who bakes a cake, and I bought all 5 without thinking about it. When Ethan came out, he looked different. Not fixed, but less unraveled. Like someone had handed him a thread. He said, "He's going to send a letter." I said, "Good." He says I have the right to re-enter the property. He says what she did could actually help me in the proceedings. I said, "Yes." He said, "How did you know all of this?" I said, "I spent 32 years in a family law office, Ethan. I watched this exact situation happen to other people's children. I always hoped I would never see it happen to mine." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The 25,000. I said, "What about it?" He said, "Is she going to get it back?" I said, "That depends on what she can prove, and what she can prove depends on what documentation exists. And from what you've told me, there is very little documentation that supports her position and none at all that supports her mother's." He said, "What if she made something? What if she has something?" I said, "Then Robert will ask to see it, and a forensic accountant will look at it. And things that are made recently have a way of showing their age." He said, "I'm not sure I want to do all of that." I said, "You don't have to decide everything tonight. But I need you to understand something. She changed the locks on a house that has your name on the title. She did not do that by accident. She did it because someone told her it would work. And the reason they told her it would work is because they expected you to be alone." He looked at me. I said, "You are not alone. The letter from Robert's office went out on a Thursday." By Saturday morning, I had received a phone call from Jeffrey, Roberta's lawyer. He did not call me because I had any official role. He called me because someone, I don't know who, had told him that I was involved, and Jeffrey is a careful man who does careful research. And he had found out enough about my professional background to know that the situation Roberta had described to him was somewhat more complicated than she had perhaps let on. He was polite. I was polite. We spoke for 11 minutes. I do not need to tell you everything that was said. What I will tell you is that by the end of those 11 minutes, Jeffrey had a clearer understanding of how a jointly owned matrimonial home works under the Family Law Act in Ontario, and what a court would likely say about a mother-in-law claiming beneficial interest on the basis of an undocumented verbal understanding, and what the consequences might be for someone who had illegally changed the locks on a property they did not own. He said, "I think there may have been some miscommunication about the nature of the arrangement." I said, I imagine there may have been. He said, I'll need to speak with my client. I said, of course. Robert's number is on the letter. It took another 2 weeks before everything was formally sorted. These things always take longer than they should. But what happened in the end was this. Ethan was granted re-entry to the matrimonial home pending the formal separation proceedings. The locksmith came on a Tuesday and I drove Ethan there myself and waited in the car while he went in. He was inside for 45 minutes. He came out carrying a box of things he'd wanted to retrieve and he put it in the back seat. And he got in and he didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "It's strange to go back into a place and feel like a stranger in it." I said, "Yes." He said, "I keep thinking about when we bought it." When Roberta came to see it that first time, she stood in the kitchen and she said, "This is where good things will happen." I said, "You'll make good things happen somewhere else." He looked out the window. I said, "You have a good lawyer now. You have documentation of what she did. You have a son who thinks you hung the moon. And you have me. That is not nothing." He said, "No, it's not nothing." As for Roberta, the claim about the $25,000 was quietly withdrawn. There was no documentation to support it. There was a check and there was a mortgage application on which the funds had been declared as a gift, which is standard practice, which is required by lenders, and which Jeffrey would have known if he had done a little more due diligence before agreeing to send letters on her behalf. When that came to light, the claim evaporated fairly quickly. She has not spoken to Ethan since. I do not think she expected any of this to go the way it went. I think she expected to be by now living nearby her daughter in a house she felt entitled to, with her grandson within easy reach, and her son-in-law somewhere off in the distance having signed away more than he should have. I think about that sometimes, about how close it came to going differently. If Ethan had panicked, if he had signed something in those first hours, if he had not called me, or if I had been the kind of mother who said, "This isn't really my business." But I was not that kind of mother. And it was my business. When your child is sitting on a bench outside a Tim Hortons on Elgin Street with 2 garbage bags and a sleeping 3-year-old, it is your business. Liam is still with me every Tuesday and Thursday. Ethan has a good arrangement now. They share custody week on, week off, and it is not perfect, because these things are never perfect. But it is fair, and fair is what you fight for. He called me last Tuesday night after drop-off. He said, "I wanted to tell you something." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I know I say thank you a lot, but I mean it differently now than I used to. Before I just meant, thanks for the help. Now I mean, I understand now what it cost you. To step in like that. To know everything you knew and use it and not make me feel small for needing it." I said, "You are never small. You are just in a hard place." He said, "You knew what to do." I said, "I knew some of what to do. Robert knew the rest. You did the hardest part yourself." He said, "What was that?" I said, "You called me." There was a pause. Then he laughed, a little. The laugh I hadn't heard since before all of this started. Some things you can't get back. Some things, with enough time and enough stubbornness and the right people in your corner, you can. Not always with the outcome you wanted, but with your name still on the door. With your son still looking at you like you're the safest place he knows. That is enough. It has always been enough. I keep thinking about those 2 green garbage bags sitting on the pavement outside Tim Hortons. That image doesn't leave you. Your child's whole life, or what someone decided was the part he deserved to keep, stuffed into 2 bags and left on concrete. And I think about what would have happened if he had been alone in that moment, not just physically alone. Alone in the way that matters, without someone who knew what the other side of the table was actually doing. Roberta and her lawyer were counting on Ethan not knowing. That is the honest truth of it. The plan only worked if he panicked. If he signed something quickly, if he confused a confident letter on official letterhead with an actual legal right. She had calculated his fear. She had calculated his fear. She had not calculated his phone call to me. That is the thing about doing right by people over a long time. It compounds. Ethan called me that morning not because I am his mother. Plenty of people don't call their mothers, but because over 41 years I had tried to be someone worth calling, someone who would show up and not make him feel small for needing it. That is not a small thing to build. It takes a long time, and it requires you to mean it every single ordinary Tuesday, not just in the emergencies. And the knowledge. The 32 years of sitting in offices and watching families come apart and understanding what the paperwork actually said, that didn't happen by accident either. I kept my certification current when I didn't have to. I stayed curious about things that didn't directly concern me yet. You don't know, when you're learning something, which version of the future will need it. You just keep learning because the world is complicated and being useful to the people you love requires you to actually understand it. What Roberta did not understand, what I don't think she ever stopped to consider, is that a person who acts without integrity eventually builds a case against themselves. She changed the locks on a property that was not hers to lock. She instructed a lawyer to make a claim she could not document. She put her name on a position that collapsed the moment anyone looked at it carefully. Every one of those decisions was a choice, and each one made the next harder to walk back. That is not punishment from any outside force. That is just the arithmetic of it. The things you do either hold up or they don't, and eventually the weight of what doesn't hold up becomes the whole story. Ethan is doing well now. Not perfectly. Nothing about a separation with a young child is perfectly fine, but well. He is present for Liam. He is building something real again. And he has the particular kind of steadiness that comes not from never having been knocked down, but from knowing once that when you were down, someone came and picked up your bags without being asked. That is what I want him to carry forward. Not the legal details, not the name of the lawyer on Bank Street. The knowledge that how you treat people in the quiet years is the exact thing they draw on when the hard years come, and that keeping your head when someone is trying to frighten you, understanding that panic hands away more than any court ever could, is not coldness. It is the deepest form of care I know how to give.